Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping middle managers and their supervisors embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. I'm Josh Hugo, joined by my good friend and colleague, co-host, John Clark. John, good morning. Happy Friday.
Good morning. Happy Friday. Yeah, we're on Tuesday for our listeners because we're trying to be consistent with that. You did a good job on the reading of the opening. I went back to some older episodes of ours, which is a fun, not that they were bad, but we were both much slower on the opening.
Yeah.
Now we're blasting through it. Let's just go.
We're on 1.1 speed, 1.2 naturally. So you double this one, man, we're flying, but we're just bringing that Friday energy into your Tuesday mornings. Yeah.
I know. If it feels like Friday to you, it's because it is Friday for your host. So that's good.
Reminder for everyone who's listening, grateful to have some new listeners joining us over the last couple of weeks. So welcome to the show. And if you're a longtime listener, thanks for continuing to come back. And if you're a newer listener, thank you for joining our community and engaging with us around all of these topics around leadership and management and self and kind of the gamut. So if you are new, but you haven't subscribed yet, please do download and subscribe to the podcast. Reviews are super helpful for us. It's the way that more people learn about what we're doing. You know, I was doing a little SEO or search engine optimization searching the other day, and we got work to do on continuing to build up our brand in terms of showing up under leadership and management near the top of the list. But the way that we can get there is by you sharing your feedback and your reviews for us. So take a minute to do it. It means a lot to us. Your comments are super helpful, and share this. Pass these types of conversations over to other people if you find them interesting. So thanks for all of you for being part of it.
Yeah. I think we're pretty excited for today's episode. We're going to continue with our thread on psychological safety here and what that means. And so I want to do a little bit of a reminder of what we talked about last time. And I think Josh and I really wanted to get into how, as part of this thread here, not that psychological safety, when in its true form, is wrong. I think it's been clearly shown to be one of the better indicators of strong teams. It's just the way that has been watered down over time. And I think some key things that we talked about that I'm sure Josh will add on to anything here on this here, but psychological safety is the ability to take risk, right? To feel safe to take risk. We talked about the inherent contradiction of that and how what that means, though, is the risk doesn't feel good. And talk about this in a minute. It does not actually feel safe. It's just that I have the power to know that discomfort I'm going to feel on the other end of that by speaking to a truth or providing input or really being willing to push back on ideas is going to be met on the other side of that with not retribution, not gossip, not anger at me, but with a real sincere desire to listen, even if that person's going to push back as well, as part of a psychologically safe kind of environment that you find yourself in. And so that really means this idea that we wanted to challenge people with of, when am I actually leaning into psychological safety with teams I lead or how I operate on a team versus the need for comfort? We actually said that in an environment where comfort is prominent or needed, you may not actually be in a psychologically safe environment. People might be holding back on thoughts and ideas. And how sometimes that need for comfort leads to us as leaders and even in the inner workings of our teams to be emotionally accommodating for each other. And so rather than willing to be able to challenge each other and feel a little bit of that pressure, a little bit of that anxiety that this is a tough thing I'm about to say and others might disagree with me, or I'm going to have to share with this person that I disagree with them, we lean into ways to accommodating for how they feel. We water down feedback, or we may never ultimately provide the pushback that person needs. And so, we laid out a little bit of the difficulty of that and how that can be challenging and how we have to condition ourselves to be ready for that. I will say that does not allow for disrespectful environments, that doesn't accommodate for cruelty or unkindness. But one could also argue it is cruel or unkind to hold back on the feedback that people need at times as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Great reminder of where we were last week. It's been actually just anecdotally a couple of people have said, "Hey, listen to the podcast or read your blog about this," which I just put out on Substack the other day. I'll put a link in our notes.
Yeah.
But there's something about this topic that I think is compelling for people because I think, I was doing some research on this, and psychological safety has been around since the 1950s.
Mm,
And it's kind of been repurposed, repackaged a few different times in the last 70 years. But it really kind of made its heyday in the mid 2010s when Google's Project Aristotle
that's right.
came back with evidence that this kind of practice was really good for business outcomes and for organizational effectiveness. And so, in that same stretch of time in the mid 2010s, as psychological safety gained popularity, I found it was pretty fascinating to look at how Gallup had been assessing engagement, team engagement, workplace engagement. And although there were a few years, I think in the mid 20, like 2018 range, where engagement was at the quote unquote highest it's been, which was like 22% of employees globally saying they felt engaged, which is an alarming statistic by itself.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, right.
It dipped in 2020 and 2021, and it dipped again the last 2 years, and we're just down in the average range of 20%. One in five employees feel deeply engaged, and engagement is often correlated to how they feel about the culture of the workplace. And it's
Right.
not just about psychological safety, but I find it interesting that as this primary initiative became popular in businesses, and 90+% of surveyed leaders across the globe in a study that was done said, "Yeah, we know this is important." It's a well-known concept. It's not a well-applied concept, and as
Mm,
its existence, I think it's not causation and is correlation, or correlation is causation here, but there's definitely some interesting statistics out there about how this became popular, and yet workplace engagement has mostly been very poor,
do
and
you
I
think it's
think it's interesting to explore that.
you think it's a well-known concept or just a well-known term?
I think it's a well-known term. That's a good
Yeah.
distinction because I don't think it's applied effectively based
Yeah.
on just anecdotal observations and talking with leaders. And again, I'm not making the claim overtly that the reason engagement is low in workplace is because psychological safety is not being applied.
It
In
seems like
fact,
one of the types of things that people started adopting as like a team norm without actually then practicing or really naming
yeah,
what it actually means to do it well. It just
that's
sounds
right.
it does sound nice. I mean, it like everything about it, psychological safety sounds great.
Right.
And yet I think and so you adopt it. It's one of those things that I think execs will just adopt. Be like, cool, I want to be with the times. I want to sound
Yeah.
legit.
Trendy, buzzwordy.
Yeah.
It sounds like what people want. But what's interesting, and as I've been researching more of this and talking more about this, is that I think one of the reasons it's attractive is because it's almost like creating an external tool to justify internal emotional accommodation, or put differently, like it feels like a good way to create warm and fuzziness in a
Yeah.
workplace that is like, well, no, this is what it means. We want to hear your truth, but we actually don't know how to address that effectively when it comes up in what we say after, and which is actually what we wanted to talk a little bit about today. Is I drove, or I kind of stirred up a couple of phrases that I've said myself. Like, I want
Yeah.
to, some disclaimers here. These are things that I've struggled with. These are things I still struggle with. Operating under pressure, the desire to kind of have the comfort of the group, to kind of fuse into this emotional hodgepodge of different emotions that kind of merge together. It's very attractive, right? It's really nice as a leader. No, I mean, there's probably no warmer, fuzzier feeling as a leader to say something and everyone to be like, wow, wow, we really like what you said. Like, that's like this
Validation. I mean, you're seeking
validation, dopamine hit, like, wow, I'm telling,
Yep.
which is, I think, some of the many problems with our political system is that instead of leading people, we're letting people lead leaders, and we just say what people want us to say. And I think that kind of trend exists in society, not just in workplaces. So, anyways, I want to throw out some of these phrases, sentences, statements today, and kind of get your reaction to them,
Yeah.
John, because they're more subtle, I think, than you might think.
Well, before this, I saw the statements. I was like, I don't think I agree with you. And so that's kind of an interesting thing too. Is today I think we're gonna talk about is this really? Are we overthinking this? Are we gonna be the phrase police on what is a psychologically safe or emotionally accommodating phrase or not?
And the answer
Um,
is yes. I'm gonna put my
because
badge on. I'm gonna
hey,
put my little police hat on, and My little
siren.
police outfit. Why
Psychological
do I have
safety.
a
Woo,
police
woo,
outfit?
woo, woo. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna be like who's the financial advisor that always had like all the bells and whistles on his show? David Was it It wasn't
Oh,
Ramsey.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, back in, like, the early
90s.
2000s.
We're gonna turn this podcast into that. Hey, I want to, yeah, and we're gonna jump right into that. I did want to make note of a couple comments that came through from folks either on my post or on yours, and I do think they help frame this a bit.
Mhm.
One came on a post I put from a colleague named Sarah Elliott, and she, for example, said she finds fault when leaders say this is a safe place, since we can never fully guarantee how safe another person feels. We can only keep showing up in ways that build trust over time. So that's an example of one of these things of like, that sounds nice on the surface, but can I guarantee that for people, especially mentally? And then you had a great post from yours, Josh, by a person named Elena Ipanova. And she
Mhm.
writes about this idea of we abs- we're absorbing tension rather than naming it directly in how respect shows up. I thought that was actually a good point of sometimes we absorb these things and think we're accepting of it, but true acceptance of it would name the tension and then like sit in the tension and sit in the difficulty and the discomfort.
Yeah,
Right.
and
So
she even brought up too, I think, another angle, which is, I think, really important, and I think it's worth discussing here and in other spaces. But there's some cultural context to this
yes.
too, right? There's some cultural pieces of like, well, what it sounds like here is to be respectful. I do think that at least in the Bowen family systems theory of work, that there's arguments that say this kind of systems, emotional systems, actually are more foundational than even culture is. Like culture is a set of norms adopted by people, but underneath that is the psychosocial pieces that go even deeper than just the cultural piece, which is a really intriguing context. And in a lot of the research done in this field is like even across cultures, there are some fundamental realities that researchers continue to observe about how people operate within systems. And
Mhm.
so it's a really fascinating piece, and she brought up a great point too, is that if cultural sensitivity becomes a cover for never pushing back, bingo,
Well,
that's powerful.
well, I was gonna say that that sounds like a slippery slope too. Of you have multiple people on your team from different, you know, backgrounds and cultures, and all of a sudden nothing can be a norm for your team because everybody has a different norm, right?
Right.
But I know I'm misinterpreting. I'm not. It's not that I'm misinterpreting what she's saying. It's just again, that's another thing where if not understood fully what something like that means and how you apply it, then you do get into a place of accommodating everything just based on, well, because I'm a different culture than that person, and they're a different culture than that person, and they're a different culture than that person. We can't tell each other how to. We can't create norms or ways of being that allow us to actually function well together. We're just going to like
Right.
continue to be in this like space of like stagnation.
Using that as an excuse to not actually engage with disagreement, right? It could say,
Yeah.
like, what I'm hearing is that this is really important in your culture. I also need to share from my side of the street that in my culture, saying this is something that's important to me.
Yep.
And there's no one culture better or less than somebody else's, and kind of being used as some sort of, well, this is the culture that should be listened to, this is not the culture. Like that kind of stuff is really what leads down that slippery slope. So let's start.
Yeah.
Can we
Yeah.
start? Yeah.
I think it's a good
So
frame for these because it's going to ask the question: do these actually name the tension, or do they get us away from it? But go on. Yeah.
yeah,
Go for it.
so this one, very common. And I think context is important over all of these. So I think let's
Yeah. Jump.
take this concern offline. How many of us have said that? I mean, I know I've said it.
Yeah, so tell me, this was one of the first ones where I saw it and I said,
You're
"I
like,
don't
what are we
know, like,
talking about?
is that emotionally accommodating?" I go, "I can see a space where that actually allows for us to name the tension, but I'm not gonna give it the space here for you." Like, let's say someone's really dominating a space or they're like, yes, they're giving their opinion, but they're doing it at the cost of actually being willing to listen to others. And I, as a leader, say, "You know what? Let's find space for this otherwise,
Mm,
so that I have a chance to actually be more direct with you," which is, like, implicit to me. But I'd be
yeah.
interested to hear from you what the concern is that this line is actually emotionally accommodating versus a space that allows me to get more direct with a person.
Yeah, I think the setting I envision this statement coming out where it's a pursuit of comfort instead of taking a risk could be a team meeting, right? A
Yeah.
leadership. Let's say you have a leadership team meeting, 10 people, and there's one person, yeah, maybe they've taken the floor with a very strong opinion, and somebody else says, "Well, I disagree with that. You know, I don't think that's right. My experience is different from what you're saying." And then the leader is like, yeah, I hear what you're both saying. Let's take this offline.
Mm,
Now,
yeah, that's yeah.
one could argue, well, you got an agenda, you have things that you need to do. And I think that you could always make the case that you can quote shut that down or redirect it or have that elsewhere. But it depends on the moment, it depends on the content, it depends on a lot of variables. The piece to examine underneath it is, as a leader, are you seeing this tension bubbling up across the team, two people, for example, and is what's going on inside of you, is that statement coming from a place of principle? And that principle maybe should be examined if you're like, I don't believe that we use team spaces to have disagreements. That might be a poor principle. But if
That's
you're like,
fair.
I'm being responsive, I don't believe we ever talk in team meetings about disagreements publicly. Fine. I would disagree with that as a principle, but that's not reactive per se. What would be different is like if you're saying that, like, oh shit, this is going to be a real mess. John, when he says these things, he just turns into a real terror for the rest of the meeting if he doesn't get his way. So I'm just going to shut it down. I'm going to say, let's take this offline. I think that runs the risk of one, not creating psychological safety, because I think one, the team examines two people in disagreement and sees a leader saying, well, it wasn't safe for the team to really bring this up here, because when that happens, even if it's a disagreement other people feel like they need to weigh in on, gets pushed to the side. It might be like, well, it just doesn't seem like Josh is ever interested in hearing what we really think about these issues. So I have something on my mind. I'm not going to bring it up. And over time, that kind of erodes trust in the space. And so I know it's complicated. There's a lot of context, but that's where I'm coming from with that suggestion.
Yeah. I mean, I hear that. I I think it's not inherently a term that I would tell people, "Hey, don't stop saying it," necessarily, because I do think it can have its place if it's like, actually what is happening now isn't safe, we're just bickering, like, we're not
Mm,
hearing each other. So
right.
I'm gonna move this offline where I can, I don't know, not control the parameters, but reframe the way we're gonna discuss this to a bit.
Hmm.
It could be useful. At the same time, I think you're right. Like, I do think the more we use this thing like this, we're in a team meeting, so we have a weekly hour meeting or whatever it is, and man, we create agendas that allow no room for debate. And then we
Right.
say things like, "Hey, okay, I can see we're gonna disagree with this. We're gonna take this offline." Well, the more you do that consistently and are constantly moving things to a later time to debate, number one, there's a likelihood that you're often not coming back to it. So
Yep.
ultimately, you think you're saying we'll have this debate, but we never do, or mm, you water it down so that you can come up with the perfect phrasing to like frame the debate how you want it to be.
Right.
So I totally get that. So I think I am convinced by what you say. My only caveat to that is I do think there's space where someone involved in the conflict or in the way that they're approaching it isn't allowing for debate themselves. And so I, as a leader, have to make the determination of like, we're not going to be productive here. And so we
Yeah.
are going to move this particular thing to
Yeah.
a different time where I'm going to address this with this particular person so they know that how we not only share our concern, but listen to
Yeah.
those others. Yeah.
I think it's always tough. I would only add, and then we'll move to this next one. I would add that I just wonder if you were to say that as a leader, say like, I'm really curious if you're going to allow anyone else here to speak up,
That's
because
true.
the way I'm hearing what you're saying is that you're uninterested in listening to other people on the team. But for me as a leader of this team, I'm really curious to hear from other people. So I'm going to ask that you pause your commentary. Let's hear from other people
That's fair.
and almost name what you're experiencing. Like, I'm really worried that if I let this continue on, that we're not going to actually get anywhere productive, but it's really important for me to
Yeah.
see other voices. So thank you for your commentary. I'm going to ask that you put that to, you know, you take a break here and we need to hear from somebody else. But if that is met with other resistance, and if somebody's really just kind of losing control, I do think sometimes it is important to kind of say, we got to prioritize other things right now. But anyways, yeah, lots of this. We can probably sit on that one for a while, but
Round
any
one,
last thoughts?
round one to Josh. All right. Round one to Josh. Round two, I'm convinced I was emotionally accommodating for people by wanting to take something offline. Round one to Josh. Round two, the phrase "I'm not comfortable with your representation of the actual facts."
Mm,
You got to
subtle,
explain this one to me because I'm like,
subtle.
yeah, sorry,
There's
very
a
subtle.
word. There is a word in there, and I'm
Comfortable,
gonna pull in
comfortable.
well, that is one.
Okay.
Yes, that is actually two words. There's a lot in here. The other word is actual facts, and a statement
Mhm.
that I learned a few weeks ago when I was out with Nick Ingalls out in Rochester, that Murray Bowen had this saying, and he said, like, there's the way I see it, there's the way you see it, and then there's the way it is. And, one of the comments that I heard a while back was it made me laugh, but it was really accurate, is when somebody says, like, "These are the actual facts." It's like, I didn't realize that you were the receptacle of all known information in the universe. Like, do you have all the facts of the universe inside your head? Like, I do think that the reality is, like, there is often more information than is available to the one person who thinks they have all of the information. And so I think the difference in this statement, one, what it's doing is it's kind of overpowering. It's saying, I have the facts, you don't, you're not seeing the actual information. Instead, you might say, I disagree with the representation of the facts as you see them because I see them differently. And I think that is a subtle but important distinction because the initial statement, which is, I'm not comfortable with your representation of the actual facts, implies that you just have all of the information and that only one person in that conversation has all of it and the other person doesn't. And I think that that can be a dangerous space to live in any sort of relationship, because the truth is, I don't believe that everyone has all of the facts. They have the facts as they see them.
Yeah, I can get on board with the subtle change. But again, I do think that's a difficult spot where you're asking people to like, but I guess the word like actual facts, you're being intentional when you say that, and that's something you can control. But if that person is, you know, again, I owe it to them to be truthful that if the way that they're presenting facts to me is not correct, then I do align with the idea of changing this phrase to be like, I interpret those facts differently. Let me tell you how I interpret them. I think it's
Yeah.
important that we all hear them so that we can then debate these different things. You know, I think
Right.
Friedman talks a lot about data and
Mm.
basically how we see data as this objective truth. And once we have data, then we are the host of knowledge. When actually, data is interpretable and it changes and it shifts. And if that, I can find a different piece of data to defend my side over the other. We see this
Mhm.
all the time, and even around facts in our news cycles. But I- I'll live with it in the sense that I do want people to actually debate each other on, hey, I see the facts differently.
Yes.
Because I
Just
do
that's
think there's
it.
a lot of yeah, you know what? I hear that. And so I think you're right. Let me just offer another thought though, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. That's not it either. That's over accommodating. So I do think something that's more in line with not going so far the other way that we're like super
Right.
honoring everything
Right.
that person says about the facts. They aren't the holder of all facts either. So
That's right.
if we're talking
That's
about
right.
and this is where we don't sit in we-ness, but in my own stance on
Yeah.
this. That's
Your
where we
own
say,
stuff.
I'm going to tell you about my interpretation of these facts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, as I see
Um,
it. This
yeah.
is just how I see it, right? I know I don't have all of the facts. I'd like to think the facts I have are the absolute truth, but the fact of the matter, the reality is that there's probably a truth that is neither yours or mine fully. But when we put ours together, we're curious about each other's experience of the facts. There probably is like the actual truth in the
Yeah,
middle of it.
I also worry too much about like we're taking a term like this and getting very meta on what's truth and who has facts. Sometimes it's just someone had the facts wrong. They misinterpreted the way you read this piece of data or this like
Sure.
financial accounting. Like I am not going to sit here and say like, oh, I see that you interpreted quarterly earnings different than me. No,
Right.
like it's not whatever it might be. So I
Yeah,
get
it
it.
opens up good questions. And I don't know if someone, I'm not saying this example is like, I showed up at 8:05, and the facts as I see it is that I actually showed up at 8 o'clock. It's like, well, you didn't show up at 8. Like that's not the same thing. But underneath it might be a frustration that you don't believe an 8 o'clock start time is right. So I
All
think
right.
being curious, I don't think that, this is saying a fact isn't a fact. I want to be very clear. Like this is often involved in dialogue and disagreement when there's a multitude of factors coming in. I'm not saying that if you think today it's 9:17 a.m. and I think it's 9:15, that that's a reasonable debate. I mean, there's an atomic clock that tells you the time of what it is. But
Yeah.
when you're coming into a debate and an argument with somebody that has a lot of factors, I think that's the place where you say, you have a lot of facts that are important to you. I have some different facts that I'm bringing into this as well. I like to speak to one, I'm confused by the representation of what you're saying, but I also have some different information. Let's talk about that. I
Yeah,
like to talk
I
about
wanna
that.
I just want to make sure our audience doesn't do the thing that you and I've talked about a bit, like, well, I know others might disagree with this, and so like, and I'm going to say something that people might like. I'm already accommodating for them of like the fact that I just am not being direct, and
Yes.
I feel like we can do that with the data sometimes too if we swing this too far the other way. Of like, I'd rather someone just say, "I think you're representing this data wrong." I'd rather hear
Ooh.
that than, "Oh, well, we might both have
Well, here's a
different
sentence.
opinions."
Can I give you one more from our list here that relates to what you're saying?
Yeah.
There's two. Let me hear your thoughts on this one. You know what, guys? Let's set up a working group to explore these concerns, and they'll report back.
I mean, yeah, yeah, that's definitely a way of not engaging with like what is the concern. It's just let's get a group of people to kind of talk about this. That's not me or not us, and then like, what are we actually going to do with that working group? I guess I get it. At the same time, I think it depends on how complex the situation is. Is this a big thing that we actually owe it to us to not just sit here in our own truth of something or our own belief in something and say, well, this is it, versus,
Right.
you know what, we need more time to explore this. We need a different group to do this. We need some neutral party members to actually be willing to like share. And we all have to accept that they're going to come back with some things that we have to, if just because it might go
Right.
against what we think, we have to be okay with at least accepting it and considering it. Right. So I do
Yep.
see value in that. But if it's just to avoid the current moment's debate and we're like, oh, let's just get a group of people to sit around and talk about this, it can be a waste of time. I don't know. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's fair. I think underneath all of these statements is again just what posture are you bringing into it? Are you saying these things out of principle, or are you saying these things out of reactivity? Are you saying these out of a desire to say the thing that minimizes the pressure in the moment, that creates comfort and says, "Ooh, the working group, that's going to make everyone feel so much better because they're going to figure this out, and I don't actually have to speak about what I'm seeing as the problem, and I don't have to
Yeah.
challenge you and take a risk." If that's the reason you're saying it, that's the problem. If you're saying it because like, no, this is a thick, sticky issue that we don't really understand, and we don't have time in this 60-minute meeting to dive into the root of it. We believe that the path forward here is to actually create a group to investigate it further. I think that's reasonable. I don't think that's a problem. I think it's the reactivity in which that statement can sometimes be shared because the answer might already just be in the room. You're just not interested or
Yeah, that's fair.
confident to explore that
I
because
agree with
it's
that.
messy and it's complicated.
Yeah, no, anytime you outsource a debate or put it offline or move it down the road, and watch out for you as a leader, watch out for yourself. If you're constantly moving things to a different meeting or a different
Right.
space or down the road or to another group, then ultimately, like, you need to ask yourself, am I just avoiding
Yes, that's it.
confrontation? Am I avoiding debate? And so any of these in accumulation is where the problem lies.
Right.
One-offs of these, I'm more convinced that the offline thing is something that I'm like, "Oh, that actually is a really good point," because there's a way to, so the way of our friend Elena who wrote on your social feed, the idea of, like, we have to directly approach the tension, and then we can make decisions after that. In that moment, instead of saying, "Let's take this offline," if we say, I see big disagreement here and I want us to debate it. I know we're short for time and I hate moving this along, or I hate moving this along, but we're going to save 30 minutes in tomorrow's whatever to do this, right?
Yeah.
That's different than let's just move this offline and talk about it later
Right.
and not confront the actual facts of tension. And I think this
Yep.
is true of that too. Like,
Yep.
I can see we're at an impasse and I'm not settled that I know the way to
Right.
forward. So we're going to put some people together to help us debate this. And
Yep.
anyway, I think it's different. I get
Yeah.
that. So, um, I wanna end,
Yeah.
let's
Let's
not
do
do this,
one more.
well, let's do 2 more,
Two
but I
more.
don't wanna, I wanna do the 3rd bullet last because I think that's an interesting one. How about this one? Let's write our comments down in this anonymous survey.
Yeah. What's
The
the
greatest
problem
harm
word
that's done
for
to
our
any
listeners?
organization is the anonymous survey, in my opinion.
What about the, say that again?
I said the greatest harm that's done to any organization is the anonymous survey for the most
Yeah.
part. Yeah. Unless you're just gathering information, then fine. But if you're, like, actually trying to get, I don't know, tell me about your thoughts on this one,
Yeah, it's
John.
the word anonymous. I just think that we create the conditions where confrontation is not only just, uncomfortable, it's almost designed against, and it really just it's an unproductive approach, and I think you have to teach a skill, not just about how to deliver feedback, but also how to receive it. I think the idea of who in a giver-receiver relationship of feedback is taking the bigger risk, it's the person giving the feedback. They're the one
Yep.
who's putting themselves out on the line, And in an organization, how do you teach people to receive it, right? If someone takes a risk on your behalf in life, the first reaction to that ought to be gratitude, right? Because they may be
Yes.
wrong about what they're sharing, but the first reaction that most of us give to feedback is like, come on, are you serious? But they're the one taking the risk. We shut it down. And anonymous surveys just, in my opinion, perpetuate that culture where feedback, it's
So
antithetical to a feedback culture, in my opinion.
how would you, put what would you say to this argument of, well, an anonymous survey actually indicates that leadership, whatever, management is open to true, unbridled, raw feedback, and that would show the conditions under which like we are creating a psychologically safe community because people can share and then we'll respond to it and they can see how we respond, but
Yeah.
not have the fear of our name being attached to it. I get
Yeah.
what you're saying. Like, I'm sorry, and I want you to respond to that, but I get what you're saying of the best thing to do is when people give us that raw feedback, we know how it is to thank them for the feedback. I think unfortunately for many people, that has not been their experience, right? Their
Right.
experience hasn't been that. They have been met and quite often with, well, I see you're just not a team player. Or you
Yeah.
must not really care about the work we're doing here if you disagree
Right.
with this. Or you well, you
Yeah.
don't have all the context or you don't know. So
There's so much of that. So
so
much of
that's
that.
one thing. But yeah, so what do you say to that argument of actually this would be an indication of we are willing to listen to it
Yeah.
and I'm going to create it safe enough that you don't have to I can prove myself to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the only answer I can say is how I see it working in its ideal state, and I understand every business organization is going to be at a different level of context. I don't think that you can be a truly deliberate development organization if you need to have anonymous feedback. I just think that it is
Yeah.
a leadership gap, it is a management gap. If you cannot create the conditions for people, regardless of role, to provide feedback to one another in an authentic, respectful, mutually beneficial way that's involving unflattering feedback, that is a problem in the organization. And you can put a band-aid solution on it with an anonymous survey, at least as a step forward if you've never solicited feedback from anyone in your organization ever. And you're trying to do change management and you have a bunch of leaders who never listen to people. But I think that it is a symptom of a deeper problem if that is the way that you need to give feedback in your organization. And I think the terms, which the phrase I've heard, I've used it, is like this is really a way for you to give the honest feedback is actually an indictment on leadership. And it is
Yeah.
not the long-term solution, in my opinion.
I mean, you're feeding into stereotypes about leaders being more reactive than
Right.
like receptive to things. Here's what I would say is the bigger problem to me is if you like do it once, like okay, I guess, but if you aren't thinking about like how can I create the conditions where anonymous surveys aren't important because or I'm sorry, aren't needed because what happens is we're creating a one-sided approach to what we're saying is psychological safety. But as we talked about last time, it's about the like back and forth of psychological safety. So basically what I'm saying is like also I can't trust you to trust me that I won't show retribution against you. And that's not the condition I'm trying to create.
Right.
I want you to know and to feel. And the only way I can actually help you to know that is by not making this anonymous. So that the moment that you put that out there, I'm going to praise the people that gave us the hardest feedback. And the
Yeah.
rest of the organization is going to see that. And they're going to see that those people were safe. They're going to say that we took seriously what they said. And maybe
Right.
we go to them to say, hey, can I give you my perspective on this? Because I want to tell you where it's different and see if that creates either some middle ground for us or if I sway you or maybe you sway me.
Yeah.
So to that point, if you just keep this going, then you never create like that actual like community of psychological safety. You just create it where I'm like showing to you that I won't harm you,
Yeah.
basically. So
Yeah.
that leads into the last one here, which I think is a good one to end on, and obviously not enough time for it probably, but
But I can speak to it. Yeah.
it says you are not honoring the experience of this other person.
Mm.
I think there's also one that like you are not honoring my truth or
Right.
something like that is another way of putting this,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
maybe better. But go on. Yeah.
let me clarify what I mean by this. I'm not saying this to the person who I feel is not honoring me. I am saying this as a leader on behalf of another person who
Yeah.
I perceive is being dishonored by a third person. what I'm doing is I'm rescuing that person. What I could say is I'm curious to the person who I think is maybe being disrespected. I'm curious to get your reaction to that statement because to me that actually feels pretty hurtful. What I'm curious, how is this impacting you? As opposed to saying it, I'm lecturing somebody, I'm telling somebody how I see it, and I'm not even the person directly involved in that. As a leader, I need to be responsible for the conditions in which somebody can feel safe to disagree. And if that wasn't called out, I might say, "Oh, I'm going to pause on that. Actually, I want to go over to you, Sarah, or Steve, or Mike, or whatever. Mike, I'm actually really curious about the statement that just was directed towards you. I want to get your reaction because to
Mhm.
me, my experience of that felt like that was pretty accusatory." And actually elevate that out of the mess in the room. And if Mike didn't say something initially, now I've done my part to ask him, but I'm not speaking for him because
Yeah.
ultimately over time, if as a leader your team sees you coming in to save everyone from a hurtful comment that wasn't even directed like that was directed to them, they're going to start to get used to the leader rescuing them and they're not going to learn to speak for their own self and that impact is just dramatically diminished when you speak on behalf of somebody else's pain.
Yeah, I want to put a pin in that. I want us to come back to that next time and maybe start the
Yeah,
next episode when we get into even more strategies on this. But I think this idea of I can't speak for others. I can create the conditions where I prompt as a leader, I allow that person to share the impact for them, but I can't be the one to like hold that for everyone. I think is a really good, intense thing to do, especially when you know others may not want to speak for themselves or the impact on themselves. So we do feel like we have to be the hero for them or be the white knight or whatever it might
yeah,
be.
let's come back to that.
And so let's come back to it. So we are going to cut it here because I've got something in a minute. But nevertheless, like I think the bigger thing, Josh, and I want you to take away from this is not to necessarily mull on these specific 6 phrases, but to think about those phrases that you do sometimes that maybe are passing conflict down the line, where you are being the hero for others and speaking up for them rather than creating the conditions where others speak for themselves,
Right.
or those ideas where you let anonymity be the way of providing safety rather than the proof that when we come out in full force in our fullness and in ourselves and in our own name to say things that we honor those people when they do it in the public square. So
Sure, sure.
uh, just big thoughts there. So it's a lot of fun actually for me. I'm a
Yeah.
little sad we're rushed, but I think it'll still make for a great episode and
Yeah.
provide us ample stuff for the next
Yeah.
episode.
Take risks. Take some risks.
Yeah, try it. All right. So until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in between.